Meher Baba singled out Saint Teresa of Avila, 1515 through 1582, as one of his four favorite Western saints and as a model of how to love him. In 1933, he took some of his Eastern and Western disciples to visit places associated with her life in Spain. And during a program in the barn at Meher Center in 1958, he highlighted Teresa, saying that the most important thing was that she devoted her entire life to Jesus Christ, to me. Christopher Wilson will discuss the life, work, and writings of St. Teresa. As an art historian and professor, Christopher has devoted most of his research and publications to the image of Teresa in art.
Thank you, Diana. Appreciate that. And thank you for having me, everyone. This is really such a joy to talk about Teresa with you all and to think about her in the context of Baba. And Charles and I were talking this morning about this and really coming to the realization of how much my life has been really wrapped up with Teresa, really beginning in high school when I first started reading her books. And my Baba contact, Ben Slavic, urged me to go to the center in addition to going to see Baba's home, because there was a lady there who was like a St. Teresa expert who had been to all of Teresa's convents in Spain, and that was Jane Haynes. And that was one of the ways that Jane and I became very close. And I talked about that in my recent talk about her. And then Charles and I went to Spain on different occasions to visit St. Teresa's convents and got to be friends with the nuns, really continuing a tradition that had begun with Elizabeth Patterson and Jane, where they had done trips to Spain and also gotten to know the nuns. And then it turned out that a lot of my, as the intro said, a lot of my research and writing keeps coming back to Teresa. I always think I'm going to do some new topic, and then the topic ends up somehow being connected to Teresa or John of the Cross still. But I feel very fortunate to be immersed in that world of the Discalced Carmelites. So I want to start, of course, with Baba, and I'm going to share my screen. Betty gave me sharing power here. Let's see. Because as an art historian, I always use images, of course. So can you all see that?
Yes.
You can see Teresa. Okay. This is the only known. Now, how do I get this bar at the bottom of my screen to leave? Let's see.
I'm not seeing a bar. What?
You don't see it. Okay. So you can see the caption?
I can't see the last line.
Okay. Okay, that's all right. So what this is the only known portrait of Teresa painted from life. It was done in 1576 when she was in Seville, founding a convent. And it was painted by one of her friars, Fray Juan de la Miseria, who was trained as an artist. And so she sat for the portrait. After it was done, she was not pleased with it. And she said, God forgive you, Fray Juan, because you made me look ugly and bleary-eyed. But nevertheless, it's probably the most accurate depiction of Teresa that we have. And she's shown hands folded in prayer, of course, with the white dove, the dove of the Holy Spirit, coming and inspiring her. And then coming out of her mouth, this scroll in Latin says, I will sing the mercies of the Lord forever. It's a passage from Psalms. And it's one of the things that Teresa liked to say to herself over and over again. I will sing the mercies of the Lord forever. So yes, like the intro said, Teresa was one of Baba's four favorite saints. Baba singled out St. Catherine of Siena, St. Augustine, of course, St. Francis of Assisi, and he spent time in Assisi, and then St. Teresa of Avila. And visited Avila in October of 1933. We don't have any pictures of that trip, but this is probably the closest. This is when they're in Genoa, Italy in 1933. And it's Baba with some of the same people who went on the Avila trip. So accompanying him were Kaka, who you see at the very far left, Adi Jr., his brother, Minta Toledano, Quentin Todd, Herbert Davy, and Chanji. And Baba had wanted to go to Spain, and Kitty was in charge of making all the travel arrangements with the travel bureau in London. And she left it up to them to plan for some of the itinerary. And they happened to suggest that maybe a day in Avila would be a nice addition to the trip, in addition to going to Madrid. And of course, that turned out to be one of the main focuses of the whole trip, because Baba felt so happy in Avila. It's so typical of how Baba works, where this segment of the trip seems to have just been planned kind of incidentally, like the travel agent saying, oh, you should go to Avila. And then, of course, that Baba indicated that was really the purpose of the whole trip to Spain. So let me, the best account we have of Baba's time in Spain was written by Herbert Davy in his journal. And so this is all in Kitty's book, Love Alone Prevails, which is one of my very favorite Baba books. So this is on October 23rd, 1933. At 6 p.m., we reached Avila. In appearance and spiritual atmosphere, Avila is not unlike Assisi. Both have nursed and witnessed the labors of great saints. Baba explained that it is the spiritual atmosphere, the quickened vibrations that give value to the shrines of saints. They are not present in the more subtle body, nor is there any special virtue in their dust and bones of their physical bodies. Saints, he said, are as nerves in my body, pointing to his wrists and arms. Baba had very special work to do here, and we were all to fast for 24 hours. During this time, we were not to touch him. Shortly before noon, we crossed the square and entered the cathedral. The spiritual atmosphere was not unlike that of St. Mark's at Venice or of Assisi. As we left, Baba especially directed that 4 silver coins should be given to the sacristan. So the building that Herbert Davy is describing there is this, which is the medieval cathedral. And Baba stayed at a hotel right across from the cathedral. And what I'm showing you here is a postcard that Nerina Machiavelli sent to Elizabeth Patterson. Elizabeth wasn't on the Avila trip, but Nerina wrote to her on several occasions and sent her a postcard from the cathedral. And on the back explains, darling, this is the church we visited with Baba, a place of old contacts. Spain is to all of us well known. It feels like Assisi. Tonight we go to Madrid. Perfect atmosphere. Travel bureau made a mess. Whatever that means. Baba mentions you constantly. Love you, Nerina. And then on the front of the card, I love this. She wrote, Saint Teresa is the saint we visited. Doesn't it sound like they went and they had a conversation with Saint Teresa? But what she means is they went to places associated with Teresa, including the cathedral itself. The cathedral has a statue of the Virgin Mary that Teresa talks about in her spiritual autobiography. And Teresa says that when her mother was 12 or 13 years old, she went to cathedral and prayed in front of the statue of Mary and begged her to take the place of her mother, for Mary to be her new mother. So Baba and Nerina and the group would have seen that statue. And then they walked by the house where Teresa had grown up, in Teresa's convent. And they spent a lot of time walking around Avila, the beautiful medieval walls that are one of the defining features of the city. And Baba, Herbert says, Baba was so happy in Avila. His spiritual work was accomplished. How fortunate we were to be with him. He explained to us how all those who were not there, his followers, would still share in the spiritual benefits of the experience. It was so beautiful, but the beauty was within us. We might have been walking in Galilee. There are in Europe, as in other continents, holy places particularly connected with great spiritual work. The 4 centers are St. Mark's in Venice, a place on the Ligurian coast in Italy, Assisi, and Avila. Baba had now visited or revisited them all. Herbert, was ordered to return to Avila in 10 days' time and to visit this particular place, which was on a hill right outside the city, to visit this particular place every day, which I did, right? So all because the Travel Bureau had added that day to their itinerary, everything fell into place just as it should have been. Avila, Teresa of Avila came up again in 1958 in the barn in May of 58, I think May 27th. Baba was holding a barn program, and it was the day we're looking at in this photo. So there he is seated in front of the fireplace in Narina's yellow velvet chair. Underneath the window, I have to point out, this is Charles. I'm standing underneath the window. He's the only standing person in the program. You know, Charles, you can chime in, but my understanding, just as a little detour here, is that it just so happened by accident that you were there that day because of a mishap with transportation to school. You got to go, and children weren't really supposed to be there. But I love that instead of making yourself unobtrusive that day in the barn, since kids were not allowed, there you are right in the front of the room, the only person standing looking at Baba. Is that right?
Well, it was actually the second day that I was there illegally, and so I was much bolder. You know, the first day I did hide. That was the 22nd when Mother had her deep experience of Baba in the barn. But the second day, I was emboldened. Oh, to see better, to see Baba better, and to have a real good fix on what he was doing, I stood. I was very unaware of who else was there.
Well, and that's a typical theme in Charles's stories that, you know, when it comes to Baba, that's the one time when you should be selfish, right? And push yourself forward and try to get a glance or a hug. And it was on one of these days, I don't know the exact date, that Baba brought up Saint Teresa of Avila. It was after he had talked about Saint Mira and how much she loved Krishna. He brought up Teresa and he said, who of you know about Saint Teresa? Has anybody read her books? Hands went up and people said, yes, you know, she was a nun in Spain in the 16th century. She founded convents. She left behind many important spiritual treatises, like the one called The Interior Castle. And Baba said, yes, all that is true. But the most important thing is how much she loved Christ, how much she loved the eternal Christ, the avatar, and me as the avatar come again. And that was the moment when Jane Haynes said she was filled with the desire to get to know everything about Saint Teresa and to read her books. So I wanted to go through some of the important events of Teresa's life, and then you know, a few big themes of Teresa that I think intersect with Baba. So the best account we have of Teresa's life is her own spiritual autobiography that she wrote probably in the early 1560s at the insistence of her confessors. Teresa was often in a very precarious situation in her life for a lot of reasons. The first one is because she came from a family of conversos, of converted Jews. And this was a period in Spain, decades after King Ferdinand and Isabella had given Jews all the ultimatum, either convert to Catholicism or leave Spain. And part of the role of the Spanish Inquisition was to root out Jews who were secretly doing things like having a Seder meal instead of truly having converted to Catholicism. And conversos, supposedly converted Jews, were always held under suspicion. You know, maybe secretly they're still Jewish, even though they're professing to be converted. Well, researchers in the 20th century found out that Teresa's grandfather was a converted Jew living in the city of Toledo, and that he had to come before the Inquisition and was punished for having maintained Jewish practices and was forced to march in a humiliating procession with other accused Jews with his young son, who was Teresa's father. And they were forced to wear these yellow tunics that identified them as practicing Jews. And then those tunics were hung in the parish church as a kind of humiliation of this family. And the family, because of the humiliation in Toledo, the family moved and settled in Avila. And they basically bought a title to nobility. So they found a way to change name and to get paperwork that really erased their Jewish heritage. So that was the circumstances that Teresa was growing up in. And we don't know for sure how much Teresa herself knew of this story. There are some scholars who have said they see the influence of Jewish writings in her own writings, and especially Jewish mysticism. And one interesting thing about Teresa is that she insisted that there be no statutes of purity of blood at her convents. Other religious orders demanded proof that nuns or friars could demonstrate that they were from what was called an old Christian family, without the supposed taint of Jewish blood. Teresa discarded any of those kinds of restrictions and admitted converso nuns into her convents. And actually, the patrons of her convents and many of the nuns seem to have been circles of converso families. So Teresa, of course, did not write about any of that in her books. The other problem that Teresa encountered was that she was the recipient of visions, and her confessors were alarmed about these things that she was describing, that Christ was appearing to her, the Virgin Mary was appearing to her. And women who were having visions were always under suspicion by the Inquisition, because women in patriarchal culture were seen as being more given to emotionalism, to hysteria, or to demonic possession. After all, Eve in the Garden of Eden was the one who had accepted the fruit from the serpent and had defied God's orders. So all women are potentially Eves who are easily tempted by the devil. And so are these apparitions that Teresa is claiming the devil in disguise. So her confessors ordered her to document these spiritual experiences that she was having so that they could assess their veracity. And that's why we have Teresa's spiritual autobiography. It was written under the command of these men who were really giving her a hard time. Fortunately, they ordered her to do it because that's when we learned about Teresa's childhood and what led her to establish her first convent. So the print that I'm showing you, most of the images I'm showing you are from what I think is really the best series of images of Teresa's life. These are prints that were produced in the Spanish Netherlands, in what's now Belgium, in the city of Antwerp in 1613. And these prints were commissioned by one of the nuns who was closest to Teresa. Her name was Anne of Jesus. And after Teresa's death in 1582, Anne of Jesus went to Flanders and began convents that followed St. Teresa's rule. And Anne of Jesus was really a kind of inheritor of Teresa's legacy. And one of the things she did was to ask an artist, engraver, to create a series of prints of Teresa's life. So here you see Teresa in her cell at work as author, being inspired by the Holy Spirit. So at the start of her autobiography, Teresa talks about her childhood, and she says that her parents encouraged her to read good books, to study the lives of the saints. And she said that she and Rodrigo liked to do pastimes like pretending to be nuns and friars in their backyard. Or what they really wanted, Teresa said what they really wanted was to die as martyrs. That was their childhood aim. What could be better than dying in defense of the faith? And so they decided that what they were going to do was to run away from home and to go to what she called the land of the Moors, right? So basically to go to the Islamic world and hopefully to be kidnapped and killed for being Christians. So they did it. They fled the house, tried to get out of the city of Avila until they were intercepted by their uncle, who was going out to search for the kids. So here's Teresa and her brother Rodrigo on the road, and then the uncle on horseback sending them back home. This story really establishes something that's important about Teresa, I think, which is that she aspired toward models of sanctity that were not really available to women. Women didn't have the potential to go off and be missionaries and to be like the friars who were going to Spanish America or to India or to Japan and to preach and convert. And she really aspired toward that model of sanctity. And there wasn't the opportunity really to aspire towards physical martyrdom. That wasn't a route for women. But what she came to see is that there can be another kind of martyrdom, which is an interior death, right? A death from love, right? You might not be able to sacrifice your body, at the hands of the Moors, but you can go through a long process of dying, very much like Baba's quote about being is dying by loving, dying to the self, that's the ultimate martyrdom. Teresa says that she kind of went off track as a teenager. Her mother died when she was 12, and without female supervision in the household, she came under some bad influences. She blames a cousin who like kind of frivolous pastimes. And Teresa said, I lost my good habits of childhood and I started doing things like paying a lot of attention to my hairstyles and my nails and engaging in frivolous conversations. And my father got really worried that I was turning into, a kid who was hanging out with the wrong crowd. And he sent me to a convent school. And while she was there, she changed her ways under the influence of some kindly nuns at a convent school in Avila. And she decided herself to become a nun. And she had a friend who was living in the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation. And she decided she was going to go join her. Well, her father was very alarmed. Her father had sent her to convent school to mend her ways and then to come back and presumably, get married and have children and also take care of him. And he didn't want her to go be a nun. So Teresa had to disobey him. And she said she left in the middle of the night to enter into this convent, and that it was excruciating to defy her father's orders, but she felt called by God to do it. So that's what this print is showing. Teresa, who is dressed in her upper middle class finery, being received by the nuns in the convent of the Incarnation. She was happy there, but she, about a year after she was there, developed a terrible sickness that included tuberculosis, fainting spells, and paralysis. And her illness was made all the worse by a quack doctor, a folk healer that her father sent her to. She says the doctors of Avila couldn't do anything for her, so her father sent her to this folk healer who had very extreme treatments, which included daily purges. And so she became so sick that she went unconscious, and they thought she was dying. And to the extent that the nuns at the Incarnation dug a grave for her. But then she woke up. She says that when she woke up, she found the wax on her eyes that was used to seal the eyes of the dead. But miraculously, she comes to life, goes back to her convent, but she's paralyzed for 3 years from this illness. She prays to Saint Joseph, the earthly father of Christ. And she decides that she prays to him for a cure because she feels that being in the infirmary of the convent, crippled, limited what the work that she'd be able to do for God. And so she prays for a cure, and she says that Saint Joseph allowed her to rise and walk and not be crippled. And that's what this print is showing. Teresa is hands folded in prayer. Saint Joseph has come down from heaven And Teresa's crutch has fallen to the ground. She no longer needs it because she's been cured of her paralysis. And after that moment, she takes Joseph really as her particular father and patron. He's really her favorite saint. And she placed a special emphasis on having statues of Joseph in her convent. She had one that she carried around with her on all of her journeys to found convents. This is one that is still at the convent of the Incarnation in Avila, a dressed statue of Saint Joseph. And he comes up again and again in her writings, and she dedicates all of her convents that she founds to Saint Joseph. And just a Baba footnote about that is that in the early days with Baba, in the early 1930s, Narina Machabelli wrote in her journal that Baba was talking about past lives, and that Baba told Narina that she had been Saint Joseph in the time of Jesus, right? And then there she was in Avila with Baba on that trip, visiting Saint Teresa's places. Teresa, in the convent of the Incarnation, Teresa felt that she was still lukewarm, that she was not wholehearted as a nun, that the Incarnation, it was a Carmelite convent, but it was in some ways, lax may be too harsh a word, because it still had, a rigorous schedule and constant prayer, but the Incarnation allowed nuns to leave the building. There were class distinctions among nuns there. Some of the nuns who were wealthier had their own servants. So it was, in some ways, it was almost like a women's boarding house where they lived according to a religious rule, but there was a lot of openness about it. And Teresa felt that wasn't good for her. She had a kind of conversion experience on one occasion when she was praying in front of an altar of an image, with an image of the suffering Christ. And she said that when she was looking at the wounded Jesus, his head covered with the crown of thorns, that she just fell apart. And she realized how poorly she thanked Jesus for those wounds, and that she determined that she was going to change, that she needed to be more completely devoted to him and to work for him. And that was a kind of turning point in her spiritual life, and really the beginning of a trajectory for her, when she started becoming the recipient of visions, and she came to feel that she had specific work to do for God. Her writings, especially her autobiography, are full of accounts of visions she had, and especially of Christ. Times when she's taken up into heaven, into his presence, and times when he comes down to earth. And, one of her most important was the episode of her mystical marriage, when Jesus says, "From now on, you shall be my bride. And as a token of our mystical marriage, I'm giving you not a ring, but one of the nails of my crucifixion," right? A reminder of my sacrifice, my physical suffering. This is a token, take it, you'll always be my bride. That was one of the most important. Of course, another was the famous vision she had of the angel piercing her heart with a fiery arrow and filling her with love for God. So she describes all these in great detail in her autobiography. Vision after vision came. Teresa also proclaimed that she could see into the invisible world. She could see both angels and demons, and was often assaulted by demons, and that God gave her the power to push them away. And so here in this print, she's holding a cross, expelling these demons who have tried to distract her from her prayer. She determines that the role that God has given her is to reform her own religious order, the Carmelites. And she decides that things of the Incarnation are not healthy, that they there needs to be a return to the original austerity of the Carmelite order that had been founded centuries and centuries ago. And to her, this meant nuns living in enclosure, meaning once you enter that building, once you take your vows, your purpose is to stay there enclosed and to engage in constant prayer and to not pursue any kind of distractions, including leaving the building. And so she wanted a rule of enclosure, constant prayer, poverty. So there should be no such things as possessions or class distinctions among the nuns. And for the convents to be founded without any kind of income. And this was a big deal because typically in Spain during the 16th century, convents supported themselves in a couple of ways. One is that they sometimes had land holdings, and so they collected rent. The other is that they would receive a kind of regular payment from the nobility to pray for their souls. And Teresa rejected both those means of income. And she decided she didn't want the convent to have possessions for land. She did not want to be beholden to the nobility for regular income, but she wanted to trust in God providing. And she wanted the nuns to work with their hands, and that would be one way to earn, money for food for the nuns. And if benefactors wanted to give donations without any kind of stipulations attached, that was fine too. And then, of course, women who had become nuns would also bring their dowries. But Teresa made no point of encouraging nuns with dowries to come and discouraging poorer nuns. She took everyone, regardless of class difference. So she decides that she's going to start her own convent based on this very rigorous rule. And she wants to dedicate it to her patron saint, to Saint Joseph. And what you see in this print is her having a vision where Joseph and Mary appear to her. And Mary says that she's very happy that Teresa is going to dedicate this convent to Joseph. And as a reward for her labors, Mary puts a jeweled necklace around her neck, and Saint Joseph puts a cape around her shoulders. Teresa faced a lot of obstacles in finding this convent. And one of the main obstacles was from city officials who objected to the idea of the founding of another convent in the city, particularly one that would not have an income. And what they were worried about was that the convent would not be able to sustain itself. And so she had to face a lot of hurdles to get this thing approved by the local bishop and the civic authorities. This is when she develops one of the most important friendships of her life with a very austere Franciscan named Peter of Alcantara. Peter of Alcantara was someone who he came to Avila in the 1560s with a great reputation for sanctity. Peter was especially known for his penitential practices, which Teresa writes about in her autobiography. She says that Peter told her that he only ate every third day. He would only sleep for a couple hours every night. He slept in a cell that was so narrow that he couldn't even stretch out his body when it was time to go to bed. Charles and I actually went to Arenas de San Pedro, Peter's place, and saw his cell. Yeah, and it's like a little tiny box. See, he's this penitential saint, and he was someone who had really been favored by nobility and even by the monarchy for his reputation for sanctity. Peter came to Avila, and Teresa sought his counsel, and he turned out to be a pivotal person in her life. Because when she was under suspicion of demonic possession by her harsh confessors who were saying, what are you talking about hearing words from God and having all these visions, Peter validated all of her spiritual experience and said, these are authentic. This is the real thing. And convinced her confessors basically to leave her alone and to trust in what God was working in her. He also intervened with the civic authorities to get Teresa's convent approved. So Teresa became very close to him and really like a spiritual daughter to Peter of Alcantara. She left a famous description of him. She said because of his penitential practices that he was elderly, and that she says he looked like he was made out of old tree roots. Here's a beautiful painting from Bolivia of Teresa and Peter of Alcantara, which really, I think, captures the depth of emotion of their relationship. And then Teresa says that after his death, Peter helps her even more than he did on earth, that he appeared to her from heaven many times and gave her instructions about her work of founding convents, which is one of the scenes you see here. So all that is to say, it was a success. She establishes her first convent with Peter's help in 1562, the convent of St. Joseph. And she placed a statue of St. Joseph over the doorway as a reminder of his promise to be the patron, and a statue of the Virgin Mary above the other. And she and the small group of nuns lived enclosed in constant prayer, in poverty. And Charles and I visited this convent and got to be friends with the nuns. Here's Teresa's bedroom, which gives you a sense of the austerity she wanted. A straw-filled bed. The pillow is a log. The nuns were to have no possessions of their own. If you go to visit these convents today, you'll notice that whenever they refer to an object like a chair or a pen, they say, our chair, our pen. There's no my. The kitchen, Teresa was very firm. Everyone should partake in the regular chores of the convent. And she said, you know, if you feel like cooking in the kitchen is a distraction from your prayers, remember, God walks among the pots and pans. When you go to visit these nuns, because of their vow of enclosure, you're never in the same room with them. You speak to the nuns through a metal grill. And so what you see here is a Carmelite, discalced Carmelite nun on one side of the grill. The visitor is in a room called the locutorio, where they're speaking to the nun through the grill. So they never come out. And they're called discalced Carmelites. Discalced means barefoot. They're not literally barefoot, but they would wear open-toed shoes to distinguish them from the calced Carmelites who wear closed-toe shoes. So the open-toed shoes are a sign of their poverty. So Teresa believes that she's gotten a command from God to go and found other convents based on this blueprint of St. Joseph's in Avila. And so she wrote a book called The Book of Her Foundations that talks about her going from city to city and all the travails that she has to go through: harsh travel conditions, stubborn ecclesiastical authorities, lack of money, to start up one convent after the other. This is a wonderful image of angels helping to light the way as she and one of her nuns journey, I believe, to the city of Salamanca to start a convent. And then she decides that she's going to do a spinoff, that this is working so well for the nuns that she needs to do it for the friars also. And so she decides to establish a monastery, and her first two friars here are Anthony of Jesus and John of the Cross, the famous Saint John of the Cross. And here Teresa is shown instructing John and Anthony into how to be good discalced Carmelite friars. One of the things that's so unusual is that again and again, Teresa is taking on a traditionally male role, that women were not supposed to be spiritual teachers, especially of men, during this time. But this image really shows how, you know, Teresa's not a university-educated theologian like John of the Cross was. John of the Cross went to University of Salamanca, but here Teresa is John's teacher. So Teresa, you know, for years went through this exhausting work of founding convents, and then died in 1582 in the city of Alba. And very soon after her death, there were reports of miracles around her body. One of the things that would help to determine someone's sanctity during this period is to exhume their body and to see if there are any signs of incorruptibility of the flesh. And this is what happened with Teresa. After her death in 1582, her body was exhumed. And the nuns and the friars who were there said that the body remained in the condition as it had been during life, that the flesh was so supple that if you touched it, it bounced back, that the body was still oozing blood. And this was seen a sign, of course, of a sanctified body. And this really starts the process of her becoming declared a saint. And what I'm showing you here this is a card, which I'll explain in just a minute, but it shows her relics. So what you see at the top is Teresa's sepulcher with her body. At the left is her heart. Her heart was removed from her body and is kept by the nuns in the city of Alba. They showed it to Charles and me when we visited, and it's a kind of shriveled up looking brown heart in a glass vase, and they pointed to a spot in the heart, and they say, you see right there, that's the wound that was caused by the angel who stabbed her in the heart with an arrow. What this image suggests, with the heart that's been removed and the holy arm, which you see at the far right, Teresa's body was carved up. This was typical in the early modern period, that if someone was declared a saint or died with a reputation for sanctity, parts of their body would be distributed and sent to churches really all over the Catholic world. And pieces of bone, for example, pieces of cloth that had touched the flesh, and these things were credited with working miracles. This brings me to my first piece of kind of show and tell. So this is a locket, probably that dates to the 17th century, and that Charles and I purchased actually at a art gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It came from some convent in Europe, and what it is a series of bone chips. And at the very top, the reason we got it at the very top is part of a bone of Saint Teresa. So, and I do think it's real. A lot of relics, of course, are, dubious, but the accounts are so detailed about the dismemberment of her body and the chipping off of bone and flesh. I think that is really her. So the only thing we wish is that Jane had been alive when we got this relic, because we would have given it to her. She would have loved this so much. The card I'm showing you, go ahead.
Can you show it to us again after your after the
I'd be glad to, sure.
Because you're sharing screen.
Okay, so it's not showing. Okay, I will show it at the end. I'm sorry about that. The card that you're seeing on the screen was given to Charles and me. We visited the Discalced Carmelite nuns at the convent in Madrid, and those were the ones that we've always felt the closest to. And we met one of the most remarkable people there, the prioress. Her name was Mother Maria of the Eucharist, who just, like the other nuns, was so joyful and chatty, loved talking about Saint Teresa and John of the Cross, and wanted to hear about our spiritual lives, asked a lot about Meher Baba. Mother Maria of the Eucharist and the other nuns often talked about when Elizabeth Patterson and Jane visited their convent years earlier. And they said a wonderful thing. Charles, correct me if I'm not getting this right, but they said, we were so struck by Elizabeth Patterson when she came back in the 70s. And they said, she didn't say much. She was very quiet, but we knew. Isn't that wonderful? They knew. And so after she passed away, on one of our visits, the nuns gave us this card that belonged to Mother Maria of the Eucharist, where she had written out Teresa's prayer. Some of you might know this prayer. But the bottom says, written and used by Mother Maria of the Eucharist. But the prayer in Mother Maria's hand says, in English, Teresa's prayer, let nothing disturb you, let nothing trouble you. All passes away. God never changes. Patience obtains everything. Whoever holds on to God lacks nothing. God alone suffices.
Christopher,
Yes,
I'd like to say it in Spanish because it was her language, and I used to recite it all the time.
do it, Rosalie.
Nada te turbe, nada te espante, todo se pasa. Dios no se muda. Con paciencia todo lo alcanza. Quien a Dios tiene, nada la falta. Solo Dios basta. I just love it. Rolls off the tongue.
So beautiful. Thank you for doing it in Spanish. It's wonderful to hear it in the original language. I have a couple other little things to show you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So first, the relic. Can you all see me now? So now you can see this?
Yes.
Okay. So there's the series of bone chips, and Teresa's is the one at the very top.
Wow.
It says Santa Teresa de Jesus. Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a big chip.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
I like it.
And I want to show you, I want to show you a
right?
couple
It's
other
one
things
piece.
the nuns gave us because you know, they live so much like it's still Teresa's time. They still wear their very rough habits made out of wool. They're very poor. They are silent all day, except for their recreation hour, which is, you know, this one hour during the day when they can play music and sing. That's when they can receive visitors. But they are, in many ways, they are so 16th century. And here's one of the things I think really highlights this. They would give Charles and me these little gifts, and two of the most shocking, but two of my favorites are these instruments of penance.
wow.
And things that they still use, like Teresa did. And one is a rope whip. And so this, right, as you say your prayers, you flagellate yourself with it. And they stressed moderation, like Teresa did. They said you could use this sometimes to punish your flesh and to be remembering Jesus' suffering when you're praying, but but not too much.
Mm.
And then this thing is these metal links with very sharp points, and it's like chain mail. But you're supposed to wrap this around your leg with a string or a ribbon and wear it under your clothes. And they said, just Christopher, wrap this around your thigh. And, as a little instrument of penance. So kind of like I think they were hoping I'd be like a little Peter of Alcantara, but that was not my path. But still, I love having it. All right, there are one other thing that I wanted to show you, since I'm doing kind of show and tell here. Yeah. Is this rock. Charles?
Yes.
All right, turn on your microphone because I want you to explain it, because you were the kind of conduit for giving this rock to your mother.
Yes, that happened, I think, when I was there in the 1980s. I did
1978.
it was a 78. Okay, thank you. Well, you know more about it than I do. Well, in 1978, when I was at visiting Meherazad, Mani took me aside one day and she said, I want you to take this rock and give it to Jane because I feel it was meant for her. And I said, yes, Mani, I'll do that. And she said, now, what is this rock? She said, this rock was picked up after Baba trod the ground in Avila. And so Christopher and I think maybe Adi Jr., Baba's brother, must have picked it up because that's why Amani ended up with it. She didn't say that. But anyway, the idea was, or the point of her was saying that here is something that Baba walked on from Avila, and that she wanted Jane, her sister Jane, to have. So that's how it came to be. And of course, Mother was so thrilled, so touched. Yeah.
Yes, it was definitely one of her most prized possessions. Monty wrote a note, this stone was picked up from ground trod by beloved Meher Baba when he was in Avila, October of 1933. It is sent through dear Charles to my sister Jane, for I know it belongs to her.
Christopher, I wonder if we could see the original, the pendant, just all of it. What are they other bone chips from other people?
They are, there's one from the patron saint of Spain, Santiago, Saint James.
Hmm.
And it's very hard to read the others because it's like in 17th century cursive and tiny, tiny little letters.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the other thing, well, the other thing I just wanted to say is there were 3 themes that I picked out about Teresa that I think are aligned so much with Baba. And the big one is, I think, the idea of the indwelling of God in the soul. And that is the theme of Teresa's writings, and especially really of her masterwork, The Interior Castle. The interior castle is an image that she created where she pictures the soul as being like a castle with concentric rooms, and that there are 7 levels, 7 kind of concentric rooms within this castle, maybe like Baba's 7 planes of consciousness. And that spiritual progress is entering room through room until you get in the very middle where God himself resides. And I'll just read you, it's so beautiful. Her very beginning of The Interior Castle. I'm reading from Jane Haynes's copy of The Interior Castle, which she heavily underlined and annotated. I came to think of the soul as if it were a castle made of a single diamond or a very clear crystal, in which there are many rooms, just as in heaven there are many mansions. Let us now imagine that this castle contains many mansions, some above, others below, others at each side, and in the center and midst of them all is the chiefest mansion where the most secret things pass between God and the soul.
Mm.
And the Interior Castle, the way she structures that book is each section is about one of these different what she calls mansions within the diamond castle. And so this idea of interiority, that the whole purpose of spiritual life is to reach, to finally attain that center room where union with God occurs. The other big theme that she stressed is what she called the joining of Mary and Martha. And what she's doing, she's taking the image from the Gospels, where there's the episode where Jesus is at the home of the sisters Mary and Martha, and Mary Magdalene, is at his feet, listening to him, adoring him, totally focused on him. Meanwhile, her sister Martha is in the kitchen doing the cooking, preparing the meal for Jesus and his followers. And Martha complains, why is it that my sister Mary gets to be here with you in the other room and I'm in the kitchen with all these pots and pans? And the point of that story, the way Teresa interpreted it, is that the life of the spiritual aspirant is to do both, to be both Mary Magdalene at Jesus's feet and to be Martha in the kitchen. And that there should always be service joined with faith. And that's how the Interior Castle book really culminates, the joining of Mary and Martha. And Charles and I were talking about that this morning, this idea of interior life and busy exterior life. How do you do both? How do you balance both? And Charles has been looking back at his journals that he kept when he was visiting India in the 70s and 80s. And feels like one of the most important parts was the conversation he was having with Erich that is about this very idea of one's role in the world, fulfilling your worldly duties while also keeping your focus on Baba. And Erich told Charles that Baba indicated to them that this is the key. To act as if everything depends on what you do. Everything depends on your actions. But at the same time, to remember, I do nothing, right? So to carry out your responsibilities wholeheartedly, whatever duty has been assigned to you in the world, to do it, as if it all depends on how well you do it, how wholeheartedly you do it, but at the same time, remember, I don't do anything. Everything that's unfolding is the will of God. It's all been mapped out. I'm a player in that script, but it's not me doing it. Charles, is there anything you want to say about that? Because I know that made such a profound impression on you.
Yeah, well, I'll just add this much that Erich, you might have to turn down your volume a little bit, Christopher. That's good. Erich, I asked him, how do you care for him? How do we work for him, serve him? But he is, after all, God in human form. How do you do that? I mean, since you can't really do anything if he is that, how do you live this life and put your whole heart into it, knowing that what can you do? And we talked about Dr. Gohair caring for Baba's body and all that, and Erich caring for Baba. And he said, Baba told us how. Baba gave us this how. He said, now write this down. So I did. Do everything as though it all depended on you, Baba said to him. And at the same time, know that you do nothing. And Erich said, that's how it is. Baba said, if you do this, you are living the true spiritual life. This is all you need to do. And then Erich said to me, can you do that? I said, I don't know, Erich. This seems very challenging. I'm not sure I can. He says, yeah, you can do it. Just do it now. Do it. And then, if tomorrow you do it again, he said, it becomes natural. I'm saying it is not so at first. It's not easy, but it becomes a natural thing. And in my life with Baba, I've realized this is the touchstone that I keep going back to. Baba wants us to put our whole heart into what we do for him. But he simultaneously wants us to remember that we don't do anything at all. Then why do we do it? And Erich says it's because of love you do it. It brings you closer to him, not because you are helping him, not because you are going to keep him healthy or anything like that. You cannot do that. He is, after all, God. But what can you do? Yeah, you can serve with love. You can act with love. What does that do? It wakes you up to the truth of who you are and the truth that you do nothing because you are not, and only he is. He says, so that's why you have to try to do that. So, so I'm still working at it, but Erich perfected that. Christopher, can I add a couple of little things to what you said?
I just want to follow up on that because that's
Yeah.
so typical of Teresa's theology and the idea of the joining of Mary and Martha, that the Martha part is doing the work for Baba. The Mary part is keeping your focus on Baba. And that's how she explained her work in the world, that what should have been impossible to her as a woman of Jewish descent, who was often held under suspicion by men, yet she was able to go out and found 17 convents. And she said she did everything, of course, as if it depended on her actions, but she knew it was only through God's grace that this possibly could have happened.
So I just wanted to add to what you said earlier about Mother picking up Teresa's, her Baba inspiring in Mother her interest, but the person who really cultivated that was Charles Purdom.
Yeah.
Just to mention, the only person that I've ever known besides my mother and Christopher, the other person who is so thoroughly seeped in St. Teresa's writings, was Charles Purdom. And he sent her his books of St. Teresa. And so and he cultivated that in her, and they corresponded a lot about what she read in St. Teresa. So I just wanted to mention that, her friendship with Purdom shaped deeply her friendship with St. Teresa of Avila. And it was like a friendship. Mother would get up every morning, as far as I know, especially in the later years, Christopher, I think this is true. And she would read something, she would read St. Teresa every morning. So it was a very much part of her daily spiritual practice. And she would put notes in it that Christopher has in these books now, that would link what she was reading to her life with Baba, or to something Baba gave, or Baba said.
Yeah.
She was, I think, but whenever Baba mentioned Christianity or any of the great, world religions, he usually said what he loves about the particular religion. And for example, in Hinduism is Vedanta. What he loves about Islam is Sufism. What he loved about Christianity was Christian mysticism. And I think there's a consensus among many in the Christian world for a very long time that the greatest Christian mystical writer of all time in the Christian tradition was Teresa of Avila. John of the Cross, of course, but he was the greatest poet, a Spanish poet, but she was the greatest mystical writer.
Yes. And there was just one last thing about her writings that I want to say, and then if anybody has questions, and that is her method of prayer, which is something I use. Her method of prayer is very visual. She probably learned this from her Jesuit confessors. The Jesuits developed a method of prayer that was called contemplation of place, based on St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises. And the idea is to put yourself within a biblical scene, to be present in that moment with Jesus, and to think about, what do you see? What do you hear? What's going on around you, so that you're not just reading about the episode, but you're inserting yourself into the episode. And Teresa talks a lot about that. She talks about how she would picture Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night before his crucifixion, when he was all alone, and that she would imagine being there and trying to comfort Jesus in his agony. Or she tells her nuns, if you're feeling sad, picture him nailed to the cross and the torments he endured. If you're feeling joyful, picture the joy at his resurrection. And so it's this whole idea of visualizing Christ, and placing yourself in the scene with Christ is something I think about a lot with Baba. And one of my very favorite things that I've ever read that Mara said is in this book, which I think came out like 1989, where there's transcriptions of, some recordings of Mara talking. But I realized that Mara did this too, that after Baba dropped his body, that she would recall episodes of Baba's life and place herself in the scene. And this is a section of the book where she's talking about Baba's silence, and about him going into the Jyoti and launching into his silence on July 10th, 1925. And she talks about how when she's, years later, that she still thinks about it. And she says, now at night, when I think of darling Baba, I wonder if he sang out loudly in the Jopti just before 12 o'clock on July 9th. He loved singing, and he knew that in a few minutes he would no longer be able to sing for the rest of his life. I just think it's so beautiful. It brings tears to my eyes, really, to think about Mara awake in the middle of the night, picturing Baba alone in his Jopti on July 9th, and placing herself really in that space with him and picturing him singing, singing one last time before it's time to start the silence that he would keep for the rest of his life. Well, Jay Baba, everyone, thank you so much for listening. And I know we have many admirers of St. Teresa here in the audience, and especially our very good friend Joe Taylor, who was so close to Jane and is a St. Teresa aficionada herself. But does anybody want to say anything or ask anything?
Jai Baba, Christopher, and Charles. This is Sally and Prakash from New Jersey. Beautiful presentation. I love listening to what you said. And in fact, we are planning to visit. One day we will be in Avila. So my question to you was, which year was this when you and Charles were there and you received the medallion? Them?
Sally, we're
sorry.
losing you a little bit. Could you repeat your question?
Oh, I was asking Christopher, which year was it that they were there?
When we
yeah, the
yes,
first-
we first went in the summer of 1990.
Okay, and
Yeah.
have there been frequent visits after that? Have you been there?
Yes,
more-
we went three subsequent times after that. Yes.
Oh,
And still correspond with the nuns today. Yeah.
beautiful. Thank
Yes.
you so much. Thank you.
You know what they do is they assign a nun to be your prayer sister. So I think I had a very wonderful period of time when my prayer sister was alive. I think things went downhill when she passed away. I'm just kidding. But no, her part of her job every day was to pray for me. Can you imagine? So Christopher had one, Jane had one, Wendy had one, and all that. So that was very sweet. The interesting thing about the Madrid nuns is that they're not in one of the original convents that Teresa founded. I think Christopher, I'm right that she founded 17 foundations. Is that right?
That's right. And Madrid came after her death.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so even though they weren't one of those original foundations, they were probably still today are closest to the original lifestyle or life rhythm that and practice that Saint Teresa laid out in her lifetime. I mean, they do it exactly. There's no compromise in this. And other convents have reformed and the reform. They've changed and they're more in the modern world. But these nuns, no, they never leave except for medical emergency. They never leave that building their whole life, and they never meet with people in person and all that. They don't speak except that one time. They gave us special permission, the mother prioress, to be there all day when we were there. And so some of the nuns were very pleased with our visit because they could talk all day. Otherwise, they only got an hour a day to say anything. But the music was so superb and beautiful. It was like listening to an angelic choir. I mean, it really was. Yeah.
And they were so giggly and just you felt like after all that silence, just all this pent up stuff came out. And they were so delighted that we were interested in their life and in Saint Teresa. Yeah, so we had a wonderful time. And they love feeding us. They they made the most delicious food. They made Spanish tortilla, which is like an omelet, and vegetables they had grown in their garden, and
Yes, but you have to say though, they didn't eat this food.
no, it was just
No,
for us.
no. They gave us all these treats, and they ordered in, or they made these treats, cookies and stuff, but they didn't have any of this food. So they would send it through the turn. There's a turn. They put it in like a lazy Susan, and then the food would come around, and we would get it. But no, they would. None of this would they ever have had, but they made it for us. Yeah.
They got the smell. That's
Yeah, they
part
got
of
the smell.
Yeah.
That's the closest they got. Yeah.
So many questions now.
What was the song that Baba sang before he became silent?
Don't you wonder? I know. I don't know.
People know what he's saying. Pratapa here knows. And so does Prakash, Sali doesn't, I'm almost trying to get it out of him. They know what guzzle he's saying. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
We've got some hands here. Let's call Tony.
Yeah, hi, Christopher. I
Tony.
feel so touched by this presentation. Until the recent Northeast gathering, when Charles mentioned it, I didn't know there were any other Baba lovers who were into Saint Teresa.
Oh.
In the mid-70s, knowing what Baba said about her, I used to take my quiet time at night in my bedroom at home, and I would read. I read first the autobiography, and then The Way of Perfection, which is about the Our Father prayer, and Interior Castle. And it was as if she was in the room speaking to me. I don't know how else to describe it. And it felt very much like Mara. Mara was still in the body, but still it had that feeling of Mara's presence for me. And then I would sit just with Baba, taking Baba's name. And I probably shouldn't talk about things like this, but on the other hand, I would imagine Baba in Quetta, say, where I had a dream where I had known him in Quetta. Early in my time, he let me know that. And suddenly there's the scene from the God-man where he's dipping his toes into the water. And now he's dipping his toes in the water and he's scampering around the mountains and all. Anyway, I was very touched also about the Jesuit prayer, because I did that as a Catholic kid before I knew of Baba.
Mhm.
And it's a wondrous thing. And it's I know Kenmore later recommended doing that with Baba. But to say the rosary and you would picture yourself with Jesus in these scenes. And when I had severe need of prayer when I was like 16, I knew exactly where to go to kind of get my audience, you know. Also, I was really lucky to get to, it just turned out that the UN had a conference Palestinian rights conference in Madrid. I think it was 92. And I was able to take off time afterwards to be with Bao for a week in Assisi. But on the day off from Madrid, I went to Avila, and it was so, the presence of the two places. I visited her childhood home. I saw a plaque of Saint Vincent, just the number 303 on it, which was when he was apparently martyred. And there was a relic connected with it. And so I think with his finger or something. Anyway, and I felt that at the time that going to Avila was kind of like stepping into the past, and Assisi felt like the past stepping into the present.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. And I'm really enjoying this so much, and I'm happy to know that other Baba love it. It's so beautiful when Teresa speaks in those books. She's still present. I still have those books.
Yes. Oh, Tony, that's wonderful to hear. Now we're Teresa friends now.
That's right.
Thank you.
Diana?
Yeah, I've enjoyed this so much, Christopher. And now I want to ask your advice. I have the 3 books that Tony mentioned, and I haven't been able to get through any of them. in particular, I'm thinking about the autobiography, and she is so harsh with herself, so severe, that I find being in the presence of that is just totally difficult for me. And I would like to read it, but how can I handle being around that tone of so much self, I don't know what the right word is. It's beyond self-criticism. It's almost not even accepting herself. How,
Yeah.
any advice?
Yes. I do. There's no question that Teresa felt a lot of humility. And I think it goes along with what we were saying, that she herself felt inadequate, but that very inadequacy led her to depend on God's grace to accomplish what she did. But I think there's something really important that's going on in that spiritual autobiography, and that is that it was written under command by her confessors under this particular set of circumstances, where they were suspicious of her visionary experience, and she was suspected as being part of a heretical group who are called the Alumbrados, who are being persecuted by the Inquisition for bypassing Catholic sacraments and church ritual and hierarchy. And some felt that her writings came very close to what was called Alumbradismo. And so she was in this very precarious situation when she's writing that book. There have been modern critics who have really analyzed that text, and they say that what she's doing is she's writing strategically in that book. And I have a very good friend named Alison Weber, and she wrote one of the most important books of Teresa, of my lifetime, called Teresa of Ávila and the Rhetoric of Femininity. And she said that what Teresa is doing in that book is she is adopting a certain way of writing that was meant to disarm her male critics. And that one of the ways she's doing it is through emphasizing her inadequacy. And that she will do things like say, here I am talking about theological matters. What do I know? I'm just a little woman who is ignorant and weak. But then she launches into her theological point. So she finds this way to undercut her own authority that was actually a very kind of intelligent maneuvering where she's taking into account her audience. And these excessive proclamations of humility that you're talking about her worthlessness, I believe are part of that strategy. That by deprecating herself, she is helping to blunt these accusations against her. And that some of the humility that she's professing here is deliberately exaggerated humility.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. That was a perfect explanation, but I just add this, that the irony of all that to me is that later she becomes a doctor of the church, which is, there are very few. How many there are there? There are 4 or
3,
5.
I think Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Lisieux, and Teresa.
Women.
Yeah,
But there
women.
are other doctors, Thomas.
Yeah.
Aren't there? I think she was the first woman doctor of the church.
Yes.
But and that's extraordinary, because that means she is a very high authority, you see, in that tradition. And the irony is, in her lifetime, of course, she had, as Christopher is saying, she had to if not hide it, she had to kind of keep saying that it was not her. It was not her. The other thing she did strategically, and Christopher, you can maybe expand on this because I don't know as much as you do about it, but if she had a confessor who was not particularly warm towards what she was doing, she would change confessors, right?
Yes.
So,
And she gave her nuns that ability also. It was one of the things she wrote into her constitutions.
Yeah. So these men, you see, who could control a lot, these confessors, she had to be very strategic about her confessors. Of course, John of the Cross was her confessor for a time. Yeah.
And she knew how to recruit male advocates like Peter of Alcantara to help her navigate all this.
Yeah, Peter of Alcantara, I think Christopher may not have mentioned this as much, but I just say this, he was very well connected with nobility. Did you say that? He was, I mean, in the court, he was greatly admired, you know. I mean, in those days, someone that holy was considered something very powerful and very important. And so Peter had that authority because of his closeness to the powers that be, the political powers that be.
Yes.
Okay, Susan, you have a question.
Hi. I'm like doing those two things at once. Listening to this talk and also working in my studio, and I just realized the rice. Oh my goodness. Anyway, thank you very much, Christopher, for your study and discussion today. This isn't a question, but just what has been wonderful for me is that I had this vision or thought, I don't know, so many years ago, and it's just come back to me now. I think I was sitting at the center, and I think I was sitting in the Baba's compound, and I had this vision of what it would be like to go through the plains or something. And it was like opening, it was like a big, it wasn't a castle, but it was like this big house or something. But the main thing is I went into one, opened the door to one room and saw there was nothing there. And then I opened the door to the next room and the next room and the next room. And I've never heard any description outside of my little fantasy about what it would be like. And you get to the final room, and of course, Baba was there. So it was just a really wonderful to hear that coming from Saint Teresa. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That's so beautiful. Yes, that's so much like her castle. Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One, what is a confessor? What is it? Sounds so ominous. What is that?
What's the
What's a confessor? The confessor is, you know, one of the seven sacraments in Catholicism is that you're supposed to meet regularly with a confessor before receiving the Eucharist to confess your sins, and then to receive the confessor's guidelines to atone for your sins. So it means going and having a dialogue with a priest to lay out the state of your soul. And so each nun was expected to have her own regular confessor that she had the spiritual relationship with, and the confessor, you know, would monitor that nun's or that friar's progress.
Boy, that's a lot of authority for.
It sure is. Yes.
The confessor knows all your secrets.
Yes. Yes.
Otherwise, he's not your confessor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to, as a Catholic, I didn't like this one priest, and then he was the only one available at times. He'd stand outside to wait to see who was coming in. Well, I would wait till he got in there, and I'd always stretch my neck so he couldn't tell. You know, I was not going to give him the know-how who I was. It was funny, you know. It's like, why I ever went to him. You know, you feel desperate if you need a confessor, but obviously Teresa of Ávila was very, very smart person, very smart, because she could deal with patriarchy in her time. Yes. Even to deal with it now is hard. her time was outrageous. God bless her. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Totally brilliant. Brilliant.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
We've got another question. Eugene.
Thanks, Betty. Somewhere I read that a gentleman listened to something that Teresa uttered, and she floated in the air while she spoke.
Yes. Teresa had experiences of levitation that would come over her. And she said that she would rather it not have happened because it was a source of embarrassment to her. She didn't want to call attention to herself. And she says that when this would happen, say in the choir of the church, that she would try to grip onto something to keep her body from rising up into the air, but that bystanders did see this happen sometimes.
I wanted to ask one more thing. You said you talked about how joyful the nuns were. That you, it's. I'm just surprised. It sounds so somber, but you're saying.
It does. I know. They were some of the most joyful people we've ever met, like the women Mondali. Just lots of laughter. They're so happy with their lives, and of, in their view, living in the companionship of Christ. And, this is something I should have said. It was very important for Teresa, all her communities of nuns in these convents today, that their prayers fulfill a purpose, that they are not just there for their own individual spiritual progress, but that they are praying for the spiritual progress of others. And Teresa really stressed that these convents are prayer tanks. And so that these nuns, they have a kind of active role, even though they are enclosed within the convent walls. But yes, they were so joyful, even being enclosed in that same building. And some of these women had joined the convent when they were 18 or 19 years old, and they're now in their late 70s when we were there. Some had never been out of the building. And then ones who had been out, they'd only gone out because of a medical emergency. And I remember there was one nun who was very elderly, and she was describing what it was like to be taken in an ambulance through Madrid, through the city that she hadn't seen in 40 or 50 years, and to look out the windows. And for first time out of that building in all those years.
I think, Betty, I think one of the things that strikes me is a couple of things. I mean, it's a very, very special calling. Maybe that's obvious to say, but there were people who we knew the very few people joined during the period we knew, and they were, let's say, dwindling, as the older ones. And because of course, in our time, for people to join that kind of austere order it's a special calling, let's just say. And people, so it's rare. But even some who did join, well, Christopher, at least one, my prayer sister actually, she couldn't stay. Now, I don't know a complete story why, but I mean, clearly, not everyone can do it. So I think that's right. It's very difficult, but the cheerfulness and the humor and all of that comes from those who are really meant for that life. They are happy. Now they work with their hands. They make things. The music is so important, right? The singing, they sing in the church that's attached to the convent. You don't see them, they're up there with grills and such, but you can hear, the congregants can hear them, and they are amazing, musicians, if you will. So there is that outlet of artistry. And I will also say that what they do at Christmas might give you kind of a sense of the joy. That is, every Christmas, of course, Advent is very important. Everything leading up to the birth of Jesus is very important. Now you say, well, it's a holiday, right? A celebration. Well, no, they think Jesus is actually coming into the world every year. So it's a cycle. It's not as though it's a remembrance of Jesus. So they are very anticipatory of Jesus being born into the world. And so it's a tremendous, they go through very deep austerities as if they weren't going through them enough leading up. And then though, what they do on Christmas, Christopher, I think it's the Christmas Eve, isn't it? They have prepared every year. Each sister has written a carol every year. And what happens is that they go door to door to each of the cells of the sisters, and the sisters sing the carol they have written for that year.
Yeah.
And it's just this joyful, beautiful carol every year. They do, each sister does. So this is how they are preoccupied. And of course, as Christopher says, they're also very hard at work for the sake of humanity. I mean, if you imagine yourself taking that work on for God, they don't think they do anything, but they think God needs them to, like Baba had his mandali, to do the things in the world for Baba. Baba needs these sisters to do his work in the world. So they were not out of the world at all. In their mind, they weren't isolated. They weren't, stuck away in a building. They were actually in the world, transforming the world through constant prayer.
Yes, and they told us
Who
that
knows?
they don't read the newspaper themselves, but the confessor would give them the headlines from the newspaper so that they could be praying for world events.
Yes, and the thing about that is that if we understand Baba to say that consciousness is all one, then of course in that understanding it makes sense that those who really are part of God's work in consciousness take that on themselves in this life, are going to be important work they do. That's hard work to pray all day. And think of the Mandali. We've been reading the Wayfarers recently. Just think of the Mandali who went and found, helped Baba find the musts all over India and went through all these terrible hardships and, had nothing, very little to eat in these rains. You've read the Wayfarers. I mean, it was very difficult. And they were happy and joyful to be serving Baba this way with these extraordinary people, the musts. Or think of the women Mandali for a certain period of time, and I mentioned this in the chat, but I think it's an interesting parallel because some people ask, what did Baba say about being cloistered? Baba actually had them cloistered. Yeah. And Mara and the women who were assigned to care and protect Mara, they lived an extremely cloistered life for a while, very austere. They didn't have much to eat. And their work all day was remembrance of God, Baba. That was that was their job. They would make things like the sisters, and that's where we have these beautiful things they made of Baba with Baba's hair and his nails. So they would make things, especially when Baba was away, but their work was remembrance of him. And for a period of time, Mara, they had to make sure Mara didn't see any thing of the world, the men especially, it was the cloistered life in a very important way. And everything that Mara did, literally every move she made, every action she did, Mani had to record it. And there were volumes and volumes of notebooks over the years that she recorded that of every single moment. Baba said, that Mani had to record every single thing that Mara did. Can you imagine the task Mani had? Mani actually got rid of them all because she felt it was too much for people to take in. She kept one example, I'm told. But all I'm saying is that there are people who are called to that, and that was their joy. I have any of us who met the women Mondley known any people who are more joyful? You know, their time with Baba was so pure. It was a gift to be able to just be with Baba all the time. But that had to be those who were ready for that, you know. I mean, there were others who could not do that. They were ready for it.
Yeah. And I would say, Charles, I like that you talked about the women Mondley, because I would say being in the presence of the sisters felt to me like how Mani felt. Because of the laughter, there was a certain girlishness about them, a kind of eternal youth, I think, because of their immersion in the joy of being in God's presence.
Humor was very important to them. Humor
Yes.
was very important. And of course, that was true with Baba also, humor. And so they were always making up skits to show Baba when he would come back. And so the sisters were like that also.
Mhm. Prakash has a question. He's wondering, I don't know if you read it here, well, maybe you could read it.
No, Prakash knows the Ghazal, Baba. He knows what it's called.
Jai
That's why,
Baba.
yeah. Jai
Sorry if
Baba.
I'm interrupting.
No.
Betty mentioned about the question. I just thought, Charles and Christopher, you both have been to Avila so many times, and obviously have mentioned about Meher Baba. So I was just wondering, were they open to another coming of Christ?
Well, Christopher, do you want to speak to that? Or you want me to, or both?
Both. Both.
Well, my impression from when Elizabeth and Jane were there, and then how they talked about Meher Baba, was that I don't think that Jane Elizabeth presented Meher Baba as being avatar or an incarnation of Christ, but that they gathered from Jane Elizabeth that Baba was a saintly spiritual teacher and a kind of exemplary model of selflessness and dedication to the spiritual life. And I can just picture, the circumspection with which Jane Elizabeth must have spoken about Baba to give them some flavor of Baba, but without the vocabulary that would have immediately put up a kind of barrier between. Charles, what do you think?
Yeah, I know. I think that's very well put. And I mean, if you knew Elizabeth, she was very, very sensitive to speak about Baba in a way that someone could hear. She didn't speak about Baba just as this is what I'm going to say, and this is what I think. She always tried to speak about Baba in ways because this was her role with Baba. You know, she was in Myrtle Beach community in South Carolina for all those years. And you know, in all of those settings, in the church and in the business world and all that, where she had to speak about Baba in ways that people could hear. And she even gave a talk at her church about Baba, and she did talk about Baba in a way that did point to his divinity, that people thought of him, but she didn't put it in language that they couldn't understand or hear. My sense is from what Mother and Elizabeth said of their visits, and also what Mother, the correspondence with the sisters. Mother didn't hide who Baba was, you see. I mean, she didn't say he's not this or not that. She let Baba speak for himself. So she would, they would give what Baba would say and how much they loved Baba and how much he loved Saint Teresa and how much, you know, he was like Jesus. And so did they get it? I'm sure they did on some level, but they weren't made to feel like it was a barrier, you see. It was instead an asset because the sisters came to see Elizabeth and Jane from their multiple visits as people who were living the life they were living in the sense of a spiritual life. And they felt when Christopher and I came, they felt, particularly Christopher's love for Saint Teresa and his knowledge of her, and because of my connection with Elizabeth, who they greatly admired, as Christopher said earlier, her presence in the locutorio, which is where the visitors sat, you know, with the grills between you and the sisters, the two sets of grills. So it wasn't just one, there's a gap between the two grills. So you sat in the locutorio and Elizabeth would sit there and Mother would do the talking and all that. If there was talking, I mean, and Elizabeth would just be, as her typical self, she would be a person of very few words, but they got it. The presence of someone, let me just say, a holy person, is something they know. They know. I mean, you can't hide that.
Yep.
So why say something, which Elizabeth would never do, that would put a barrier between Baba and them? She wanted them to feel Baba. She didn't want to explain Baba. Yeah, that's how she was. Is she? Why should she? What difference does it make? Baba explains himself by just his presence and his name, you know. And that's how she always felt. She never felt like she had to convince someone or tell someone this or that. I know Baba lovers have gone there subsequently, you know, years after that. And sometimes they may have talked about Baba as the avatar in this. I don't know how the sisters responded to that, but I'm sure they were gracious, you know, and took it in. But we didn't feel, I was with Christopher, you know, when we visited, we did not. I also visited once with two friends who were both Jewish, Baba lovers. This is before I knew Christopher, and they were both Jewish. And the sisters just, when I told them, I said, you know, here's Alan and Michael Cohen, and they're Jewish. And the sisters rushed up to the grill to look. And so the sisters said in Spanish, and it was translated by one of the sisters, they had never seen a Jew before. They were fascinated to meet Jews, you know. It was so funny. It was just so sweet in a way, you know, and they were loving and happy, you know, that this was some great thing that they were experiencing. But what I'm saying is that when Christopher and I went, because we went obviously on the coattails of Elizabeth and Jane, that's why we were welcomed and treated specially. That's why we were given so much time. It wasn't us. It was because of Jane and Elizabeth, who Jane was a very good friend to all Carmelites. They knew that. She was a friend of Teresa. She was a friend, and they knew that. So they trusted when she had us come. But I'll just say, and I hope this isn't speaking out of school or saying too much, and Christopher, you can say what you can add to this or not. We had a great dilemma also, not only about Meher Baba, how to say it and what to say, although I never felt it was difficult, actually, and I never had any feeling that I was not saying enough, I was saying too much. I was just natural. They would ask, you know, about the center in Myrtle Beach. They would ask about Wendy and Buzz, or Edward, they called him, like that. So, you know, it was natural. We never had to sort of explain things. But the thing that did create some tension in me as we went, I guess, our third time, and was my fourth, it's third and last we went. We'd stopped traveling a lot after that. But and our sisters that we knew had began to pass away, about being gay, about being a couple. And we knew that that would be a huge barrier for them, that they would not be able to grasp it as something that they had. That's how we felt. It may be different there now. They may have more exposure to the world and have, but of course, there's the teachings of the church as well. Although this Pope has been opened the doors to LGBTQ people in a way that no Pope has ever done, and asked churches to be welcoming and accepting and so forth and so on. Well, that never happened before. I don't know how these sisters today are receiving what Pope Francis is giving on this issue. I have no idea. I haven't been back. All I'm saying is that it did create tension in me, because I felt that the more we went and the closer we were, and we would write to them, and we would write to them from the same address. I was thinking, okay, what are they thinking here? To confirm bachelors, I don't know, but it became a little too much for me. I'll have to be honest. I did not like not being able to be more natural about that part of my life with the sisters. That's not why our visits came to an end exactly, but I think that was kind of it was enough then. I think we had enough. We had our portion, and I wasn't going to bring that up or push that on them. It was not necessary, but it was hard for me. I don't know, Christopher, does that make how you feel about it? But that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, that was always a dilemma for us, I think. And then we have a friend, not a Bible lover, but she's a professor of Spanish, who went, I guess, a couple years after that, and who, I didn't know she was going to do this, but had a very frank conversation with these nuns in Madrid about Charles and me. And apparently a lot came out, and the nuns asked her, they said, "Are Charles and Christopher married?" And we weren't, same-sex marriage wasn't legal at that time, but Barbara said, no, they're not married because you can't do that in the US, but they love each other very much. So I think they did learn a lot more through her visit, but they still write to us and say beautiful things.
Yeah, and we might have been able to talk to them about it for all I know. I think we might have underestimated, but of course that was a long time ago. I think today is a different time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And one last thing, I mean, I don't want to take much time. Maybe I'll speak out of turn also. Rosalie's asking about the last song that Baba sang. It's Sham Sundar Ki Sudhbud Ai. I mean, I think it probably means when this particular person who wrote, his name is Niyaz, Niyaz. I think it means basically when I felt the consciousness of God, and so it goes, the song. So that was the last song Baba sang. I'm sure you all know. Since Rosalie mentioned, I just wanted to mention that too. Thank you, everybody. Jai Baba.
Thank you, Jai Baba.
We do have a couple more questions. Are you up for that?
Sure.
Joy?
I
Whoopsie, you're just muted yourself again.
know I'm muted, but I don't get to it as fast. I was sort of in and out of the talk, and I really had never been introduced to Teresa, and I really enjoyed what I've heard. Thank you, Christopher and Charles, and thank you for sharing your most recent share about talking to the Carmelites about being gay and things like that. I thought that was wonderful. Mine is a very mundane question. But before that, I don't know if when I was listening to where you visited, I wasn't sure if it was New Mexico or in Spain. So I don't know, it could, because I wasn't sitting down and just focusing on the time.
Oh,
So
but yeah, that was in Spain. We went all over the place. I think we went to most of the convents and did a lot of driving around Spain. And
yeah.
we would go to a convent and knock on the door and say, we're friends of Carmel.
Mm.
Yeah, we love Saint Teresa and John of the Cross, and we would just like to visit. Do you have time to talk to us in your locutorio? And they would always say yes. You know, they were delighted.
So
We
were
also
they all Carmelites where you
all
went?
Carmelites, yes. But we also one of the best experiences I think I had was we went to the Discalced Carmelite convents in Belgium that had been founded by Teresa's closest nuns, Anne of Jesus and Anne of St. Bartholomew, ones that were, you know, some of her most trusted confidants. And we went to the one in Brussels, and I was doing some art history research, and I knew that they had a series of paintings in their cloister that I really wanted to have pictures of because I wanted to write about. And so we were there, we were talking to them through the locutorio, and I said, you know, these paintings you have never been published, but would it be possible for me to get pictures? And we have our camera here. Could we give you the camera through the turnstile and you take pictures of them for us? And they went and they kind of whispered to each other. And we knew it was a big ask because it was, you know, camera with a lot of fancy functions. So I didn't know if they'd be able to do it. And so they went and they talked among themselves, and they said, they came back and they said, we've decided that we'll let you come back into our area and take the pictures of the paintings. And I was stunned because that meant going back into the enclosure, like by the nuns' cells. And they said, we would like to let you in today, but we can't because our confessor is here. So come tomorrow.
Because they would have to confess that they did it? Or what?
Yeah, so we went when the priest wasn't there. They opened up the door and we go back there with our camera and our tripod. The nuns are enclosed, take pictures of their paintings. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, but on top of that,
Yeah.
on top of that, these sisters, and I have to say, they were the most welcoming next to the Madrid sisters. The other places were, you know, less, you know, not much connection, but for me, but the original foundations we visited, but this one in Belgium, they were so welcoming. Anyway, they brought out one of the great things they have there, one of the great relics. They brought out Saint Teresa's cape.
Oh my.
That she wore.
Oh.
They had it there and they brought it out, and we were seeing it through the grill, and we were just amazed that this hundreds of years later, here is this cloak that she wore, and you know, they showed it to us and we were so happy to see, and it's how wonderful. And then they said, would you like to wear it?
Oh.
That didn't they, Christopher?
Yes.
They said, would you like to wear it? I mean, we couldn't believe it. And so they put it through. There you are.
Oh
There's
my.
Christopher wearing the Saint Teresa's cloak.
Wow. Oh. Wow.
What was
Isn't that
that like,
something?
if anything? I'm not expecting that you had to have any experience, but what was that like?
It was
Christopher.
joyful. It was joyful. It was wonderful seeing them
Yeah.
so joyful at me wearing it. And then they kept saying to Charles, take pictures of him wearing it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is, did they know they fed you guys really well? Did they have any reason to have a dietary restriction for themselves? Did they go out shopping for their food? Did they eat meat?
They don't eat meat. They have these helpers who are secular people who are kind of conduits for the outside world, who do things like go and do the grocery shopping for them.
I see.
Yeah.
But they
everything
don't have any treats. They gave us like custard and stuff. They
cooking.
don't. I think maybe on a holiday they might, Christopher, Christmas. I've forgotten that. piece, but I think day to day, no, they have nothing like that. So I think the rule is poverty,
Right.
and they eat accordingly. I mean, they eat very little, and they eat what you would eat if you didn't have much,
Okay.
very basic food.
Okay, thank you. I also had, somebody else mentioned having an experience that Teresa was similar in a way. And I was in the background doing something, listening, and I heard an experience that I've had that was very similar, but I don't feel like sharing it. But it was like really nice to hear that someone else had had that same, similar or same spiritual experience.
Wonderful. Sue, you have a question. Sue, you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. I just have a comment or a couple comments. Christopher, thank you so much for following up with this presentation after your talk about your relationship to Jane and Teresa and so on. And one thing too, I'd like to say on the heels of what Charles was just talking about the discomfort of what do you do in discussing being gay. I have to say, Charles, first of all, when you did the Zoom talk, or they showed on Zoom your presentation at the Northeast Gathering, when you started discussing, I was not with Baba in the 90s when you all were at the center and you just related that whole experience. I was so moved. And again, Christopher, at the end of your talk about Jane and Saint Teresa, you also mentioned your relationship with Charles. And I had such fullness in my heart and tears in my eyes after your talk, Charles, and then again, the remembrance of Charles' talk through Christopher's relating the whole circumstance, that it got me to thinking that Baba, it just seems to me that when his stories through all of his creation are presented with authenticity and with vulnerability, they strike the heart. At least they did for me. So I just want to thank you for that. It was absolutely beautiful, absolutely wonderful. And I myself am married, but I worked with the airline industry for a long time and had many friends who were dealing with, and this was back in the, 70s, I guess, with the whole issue. Unlike today, it was much different back then. But I just want to say that both of you, with your, like I say, vulnerability and authenticity and willing to share that personal aspect of your lives, just to me is another way that Baba demonstrates his love. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm very touched by what you just said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Me too. That really means a lot, Sue. Thank you so much. I'll remember that.
Thank you.
Sharon, have something to say?
Unmute.
Excuse me, waking up. So some of you probably know there's a very well-known Jesuit priest, Father James Martin, who's very active in advocating for gay rights in the Catholic community and other places. And he's written many books, and he also does a weekly homily on Fridays on Facebook. He's based in the East Coast. I also wanted to say that in the United States and elsewhere, there's large communities now of people born Catholic who are suddenly discovering their Jewish roots, especially in the U.S. Hispanic community in the Southwest. And the third thing is that there's a group today called Nuns and Nones, where the elderly nuns are being sought in communities with younger secular people who want to understand how to be social activists and still function within a social hierarchy. So Jai Baba, thank you.
Jai Baba, thank you, Sharon. Yeah, James Martin, I admire so much. I follow him on Instagram and Facebook, and he has done remarkable work about really ministering to LGBT people, having his own meetings with Pope Francis to advocate for change in church doctrine, been really assaulted by very conservative American bishops for his more progressive attitudes about this, but he really feels that this is the Holy Spirit's work within the church right now to change things around after so many centuries of LGBT people feeling so ostracized from the church. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him.
Yeah, I mean, word has it that James Martin has very much influenced Pope Francis on this issue, that they have met and talked about this. So the recent step that the Pope took, which was one of the most dramatic things that's come out of the Vatican to me in a long, long time, when the Pope said that now priests can bless civil union, if you will, or bless a gay couple. I mean, so yeah, that's not marriage, of course, but what a huge step that the church now can bless gay couples. Now, a lot of priests won't do it, but the fact that the Pope has done that is a huge change, a very important change.
Wendy.
First of all, thank you, Christopher and Charles. This was awesome. She's been haunting me for years, and I just kept pushing her away and pushing her away. Well, I think the pushing has stopped. I think so. My first question is, where do I start? What's the best diving board to start reading? And the second thing is, I don't want to get into it right now, but when you replay this, look at where you held the stone up, that white stone. Baba's face popped up like that. For me, it was like, whoa. So just don't want to take up time now, but in your quiet space, take a look. It's pretty cool. Anyway. So where do I start? So is it, her autobiography, or
maybe start at the interior castle, I think, since we've been talking about that image and how much that her theology intersects with Baba. It's so beautifully written, and I think you'll find so many ideas there that will seem familiar, Wendy, because of Baba.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a gorgeous book. Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Baba, and thank you again. Love you both.
Thank you. Love you too.
Rosalie.
Hey, Baba. Hey, Baba. I wanted to say when the present Pope was asked why he took Francis, because there had never been a Pope called Francis in thousands of years. And they said, because he is a Jesuit, he's in the Jesuit order. There are orders in the Catholic priesthood and sisterhood. And he says, no. And they thought naturally he's taking it because, and this saint is buried off Goa in India, St. Francis Xavier. He said, no, I took Francis because of St. Francis of Assisi. I have to say, it reminded me of Bob being interviewed by Purdom, 1931, and saying that all the major religions are tottering. I see them tottering. And I would say Catholic is a major one, and it's pretty well tottering. And there was also interesting things I hear, because I still have those Catholic ears. Actually, Catholic means universal. So Baba's really made me universal. But I do listen, and I think he's the last pope. If I was doing a lottery, I'd vote on him for the last pope. And, it's very interesting because, I'm raised very Catholic. And I remember my mother telling me, and I put a question mark over my head. She says, never come home and say the priest or the nuns told you something, because I will tell you the same thing if you don't like. And I thought, I don't know, that was very strange, even as a child, and the Pope is the representative of Christ on earth. And, it's like there are rumors that there was an assistant of a cardinal. And the cardinals are the ones that vote the Pope in. And that they did open that last letter from Fatima. and it says the Christ was back born in 1894. So whether or not that is true, in a way it is true that it even came up, because everyone wants to know, I will say one other thing about this Pope, Francis. He didn't want to be Pope. They wanted him to be Pope before the other guy got in. And he says, don't vote for me. I don't want to be Pope. But he figured if he was asked again, they wanted him when the other guy stepped down. He figured, well, I guess it's God's will, just do it. Yeah. Can you imagine being Pope or being anything? Yeah. It's going to be the age of humility. Yeah. But you have to have a sense of humor about it. It's like, there was a sister that says she had St. Patrick's hip bone in her pocket. I mean, it was really funny how these things go on and on. Yeah. I mean, but we're very lucky to have Christ and have even a shred of his hair.
Yes, yeah. Without a yes.
Oh my gosh, it's like, wow. Jai Baba.
Rosa?
Jai Baba, everyone. Thank you so much.
Can you see you a little better? We're not seeing your chin. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this very engaging presentation, Christopher and Charles. I come from a Jewish household, not all that Jewish, but still a Jewish background, and steeped in Sufism, which has really been my spiritual thrust until I sort of finished with that and Baba lassoed me immediately. And yet, I never intersected with Catholicism. I mean, this lifetime, I think I actually came and finished with religion, where spirituality had a hold on me. But nevertheless, all these divisions I've carried around in my head, which are ultimately, separation, have dissolved. And I saw this wonderful video of Saint Teresa of Ávila. I think it was called The Prayer of Quiet. And I have recommended it over and over to people. And it is such a profound experience that it's on YouTube. I recommend it. I mean, I could reiterate all those wonderful qualities of Saint Teresa that I find so admirable and inspiring, but I would just be repeating what everybody said. But she is really singular and a powerful being and conduit for God in the world and a way shower. Anyway, when somebody was sharing about, the evident vulnerability and authenticity of you, Christopher and Charles, it came to mind how many times in different venues with different people, I have seen the same ability and willingness like never before in the history of human consciousness, it seems to me, for people to know themselves in that place of vulnerability and authenticity and be willing to share it individually and collectively. And to me, this is one of Mayor Bob's clear evidence of his very active manifestation in the world. And thank you, Baba. It gives one hope to see this advancement in human consciousness. Yeah, Jai Baba. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rose. That's beautiful. Jay Bob.
Jai Baba.
Thank you so much.
Well said, Rosa. Tony?
Yeah, just a very brief thing, coming off of that. I've come over the years to take some of the things Bob has said, not so literally, and more as having a larger meaning. Well, the one that comes to mind now, though, is when he talked about walking naked. If I tell you to walk naked in Ahmednagar. And I've kind of almost taken that as a precept for myself, because to me, that is saying, be vulnerable, be authentic, walk naked. And then there's a quote, Baba quotes some saint saying, even God is afraid of the naked. But the idea of not putting anything on, not withholding, not being afraid, how it's just be who you are. Just be totally who you are. And that is bringing you closer to Baba. So that's all.
Yeah, I agree.
That's
Yeah.
the one thing I remember, the Erich should be natural. I've so treasured that.
Thank you, Tony. That's beautiful. Betty.
Wow, this has been quite a
And doesn't Baba give us, he certainly gives me courage to keep along that path, especially initially when it was really stepping out of the comfort zone. Yeah, Baba's there with such incredible support, confidence, encouragement. Yeah, what a gift.
I know I'm keeping people, so people might want to leave, but I'd have to ask Charles to tell one story since Tony mentioned the nakedness. Charles, you have to talk about Erich and nakedness.
Oh, that's very, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I'll try to tell a short version because it's a beautiful thing. And I think most people know the story, but it's, as with Baba, all these special stories are new every time they're said. But at the heart of this story is a simple thing. Erich was exhausted.
Look, you just muted yourself, Charles, there.
Oh yeah, I was just asking Christopher. There we go, because of the reverberation in our household here. No, Erich was very tired from the new life, exhausted. He loved it, but he came back exhausted, and so Baba, you know, I'm sorry, I'm trying to. I'm sorry, because I kept hearing myself. So anyway, Baba asked him to go with him, as many of you know this, when he went to the United States in 1952. And Erich said, Baba, yeah, don't make me do that. I'm so tired and all that, take the other ones and all that. So he demurred. He said, Baba, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. And Baba said, what is this? You're my disciple here, and you're telling me you don't want to do this that I'm asking you to do? Oh, you Baba, is so tired and all that. I don't traveling with it, and Baba said, why? Why are you with me? If you don't want to do this, what I'm asking. And Eric said, yeah, Baba, you're so right. You're so right, Baba. Why am I, if I can't do this thing for you? Yeah, it's so true. Why am I here? Why am I here? And so, then Erich left Baba's presence and he went, and when Erich tells this much more detail, so I'm leaving out things, but then Erich went off and to think of this, and Erich said, now it's true what Baba has said. I can't do this for him, so I must leave now. I think I precipitated this story by asking Erich if he ever thought he would leave Baba. I think that's what triggered this story. Anyway, he said, yeah, so I said, yeah. So now I must go. When should I go? Now. Baba said, why are you here? I should just leave here now. I am useless to him. Yeah, it's clear. I cannot do what he wants me to do. I am useless. I'm going to leave now this place. It means Meherazad. And he said, well, yeah, so now that I'm leaving here, what can I do? I should take my bedding, I should take, because where will I sleep and all that? So he began to, roll up the bedding. And then he said, no, I can't, I can't take this bedding. Baba gave me this. It's not mine. It's his. It doesn't belong to me. How can I take this bedding? So he said, I'll leave the bedding. So what? I don't need it. Yeah. So I'll take just a few things. And he gathers a few, pieces of clothing and all that, some pants and that. And he's starting to put those together and all that. And then he realizes, he says, yeah, look at this now. What am I doing? I am taking these clothes that are his. These are his, not mine. This belongs to him. How can I take it? I'm not, Erich, I'm not taking it. If it belongs to him, it's not right that I should have this. And so he throws the clothes down. He says, I won't take these. And then, and this is Erich telling me this. He says, then Erich looks at the clothes that he's wearing. And he says, oh God, what to do now? These very clothes that I'm wearing, yeah, these are also his. I must leave these also. They belong to the Lord. They don't belong to me. I'm not taking them. I can't take them. And so he begins to take off his clothes, you see, his shirt. Yeah, Eric said, this is how it was I was so determined that I was going to leave. And then he looks down at his body. I'll just leave naked. And he looks at his body, his hands, his feet. He says, what to do now? This belongs to him. This does not belong to me. He says, yeah, everything I have, everything I am is his. Even naked, it's his. And he's thought that. Word came from Baba, come, Baba wants you. So he went back in Baba's presence, and Baba said, all is forgiven. If you don't want to go, fine. Yeah, it's fine. And Erich was so happy, you see. And then Baba says, but now, since you're not going with me to the West, I want you and Pindu to go all around Andhra and get ready for my darshan visit. So you have to go and tell them all that I'm coming and make all arrangements. And Erich said, oh God. He said, then I realized, what have I done? That is much worse thing, because then I have to go all around and speak out, which I don't do. I don't like speaking out. I have nothing to say. And I am not even with the Lord. If I had gone with him to America, at least he would be there. Now I have to go with Pindu, who doesn't say anything, and I have to speak to all these people. And they treat you, when you go into these villages, what do? They treat you like Baba is come. That's what they keep you up all night with singing and all. They think your Baba's there. So you cannot rest, and then you have to speak out. They want to know that you speak out. And so one thing I said to him, I said, Baba, if you ask me to do it, I will do it. I see now. I am nothing but yours. And if you want me to do this with Pindu, I will do it. But one thing, Baba, I do not know what to say. Baba, I don't speak out. I don't know anything to say, what to say. I don't know. I speak when you tell me to speak, I speak on your behalf. But for myself, I don't know what to say to these people. How can I speak? And Baba says, why are you worried about that? Well, because Baba, there's nothing to say. And Baba said, who do you think is going to speak? Well, Baba, you said you want me to go around and just speak. No, Baba said, no. Baba said, I will speak. But Baba, how will I know? Baba says, don't worry, I will speak. But do one thing. Before you speak, you say to me, you say to Baba, Baba, let me say only what you want to be said. Can you do that? Yes, Baba. Before you speak, you say that. Before you speak, you say to me, Baba, let me say only what you want to be said. And then Baba said, say whatever you want after that. What difference does it make? Just speak out, whatever comes, say it, because I will take care of it. It will be me, I will take care of it. So you have nothing to worry. And so then Erich turned to me and he said, you, Charles, complained to me that you have to speak about him. And you tell me you don't know what to say. And you don't feel worthy to speak. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter. Don't worry. But before you speak, do this one thing. You ask Baba, let me say only what you want to be said. And then after that, it's not yours at all. Can you do that? I said, I'll try, Erich. He said, no, what means what? Try. Can you do it? I said, yes, Erich, I'll do it. And from that day forward, that's what I do. That's the story.
No one inhabits Erish like you do, Charles. Oh my, or the other way around, I don't know. It's you become him. It's amazing. Thank you. Wendy, one more.
I think I'm going to keep honorable silence. I think Charles said it all. Jai Baba.
You sure? It's your opportunity.
I think Baba's saying zip it, Skippy. So good.
Oh, what a morning. Wow. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful. I loved it. Thank you.
I have a pretty wonderful husband, don't I?
I do too.
You need to come up to Canada.
You know, it was really beautiful that Christopher knew that Charles needed to tell that story. And the both of you together, the beautiful support and love that you have, because no one tells a story like Charles. And I feel that Erich was talking in this presence right now, and I just started crying because you can see in Charles' face. I mean, Charles transforms between Baba and Erich and Baba and Charles.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you.
Betty, thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, Bob. Maybe we just have a moment of silence.
yes.
Jai Baba.
Jai
Thank
Baba.
you, Baba. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, dear Saint Teresa. Ooh.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Baba,
you.
everybody.
Baba,
Yeah.
thank you.
you, Jai Baba.
Hey, Baba, Christopher, and Charles. Wonderful, wonderful
Thank you.
sharing on